the honourable member for Ottawa South.
Well, good morning, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to the colleagues in the House today. It's an honour to be here to debate this important Opposition Day motion brought forward by the NDP, and I commend the NDP for bringing it. It's a very, very timely issue at the doors in our communities across the country. All of us as MPs are hearing about these proposed changes. All of us are getting feedback. All of us are getting pressure from different parts of Canadian society with respect to the 5-point plan put forward by, I will argue, not simply Canada Post, but by the Government of Canada and the Minister whom we've just heard speak. In fact, my thesis, Mr. Speaker, the common thread that will weave itself through these remarks over the next 20-odd minutes is that this report and this effort brought forward by the Conservatives is simply not good enough. You know, Mr. Speaker, I'm privileged because Canada Post is headquartered in my riding. I have many neighbours, many constituents who work with Canada Post. They may be managers, they may be financial officers, they might be postal workers. There are good people working with Canada Post, and I salute the good people with Canada Post, whether they are on one side or other of, in my mind, a seemingly artificial divide between management and labour. There are good people in management, there are good people who are on the floor sorting mail, there are folks who are delivering mail now at night time. There are a lot of good people with the corporation, and I salute and commend them for their years of service in helping to build the tradition of Canada Post. However, having looked at this plan extensively, having heard from witnesses at committee, having heard from hundreds of Canadians across the country, my colleagues here in the Liberal caucus today nodding in agreement because they're getting the same feedback, this 5-point plan is simply not good enough. It does not, in my mind, meet the abilities at Canada Post. It does not meet the creative possibilities for our Crown Corporation at all. And for the Minister to stand up and talk about other jurisdictions having to make difficult choices, she is only partly right. It is true that other jurisdictions like Canada Post are facing challenges. Challenges with respect to the sustainability of service, challenges with respect to electronic communication, challenges with respect to a transition in their core business areas. But when I hear the Minister speak and highlight, for example, the changes going on now in Britain, I'm hard-pressed not to believe that, in fact, what the government's really up to here, Mr. Speaker, is that its ultimate intention is to drive Canada Post into privatization. That's where they'd like to go. It's what they did with Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, Mr. Speaker. It's what the Minister of Finance tried to do in Ontario with Ontario Power's transmission lines before he created the 407 private highway. It's what they do. It's what they do. They take cherished Canadian public services like the Postal Service. They take the corporation involved in delivering that cherished public service, and they begin to run it down. They begin to talk negatively about it. They begin to talk about it being too expensive. They talk about it as being, in the case of Atomic Energy, a sinkhole costing all kinds of money. They run down the asset, Mr. Speaker, and then they turn around and say, well, we really would like to see this asset privatized. It's part of the conditioning that the Conservatives use as a tactic with respect to Canadian citizens. Instead of spending better energy and good energy in trying to improve a plan on a go-forward basis to keep postal services for Canadians who deserve them. I've always believed, Mr. Speaker, government has an obligation to get the big things right. And postal services is one of the big things that Canadians count on. If we go back to testimony, Mr. Speaker, that was heard at committee before Christmas, reminding Canadians that, of course, these changes were sprung on Canadians the day after the House rose, just before the Christmas card delivery rush. This plan was foisted on unsuspecting Canadians, on unsuspecting municipal governments, provinces, businesses, trade organizations, etc. And we heard from these different actors in Canadian society when we convened the Transportation Committee to ask the President and CEO of Canada Post and other witnesses to give us their views, because there had been no meaningful debate. And what testimony confirmed, Mr. Speaker, is that Canada Post and the government under the Conservatives appears to be stuck in a time warp. It's the 1960s all over again. Management versus labor. Labor versus management. And never the two shall meet. We confirmed that the union heads never had a series of meetings with senior management at Canada Post. We confirmed that the minister would not meet with senior labour representatives. We confirmed that this minister, the fifth, by the way, Mr. Speaker, in 7 years, we confirmed that this minister refused to bring management and labour together at one table to say, how can we find a better plan, a better approach going forward for Canadians who count on Canada Post services. It's an ill-thought-out plan. And what we saw was Canada Post management retaining the good services of the Conference Board of Canada. Again, I'm privileged to have the Conference Board of Canada headquartered in my riding, Mr. Speaker. A good think tank, does solid econometric analysis. So we had on the one hand management retaining the Conference Board of Canada, and on the other we had Labour retaining the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And each group decided to put up their blue-chip panelist research outfit, claiming that they had one answer and the other had the other answer, and it was a clash of the research institutions. And meanwhile, Canadians get a 5-point plan sprung on them by surprise, and frankly, they don't care who was retained whom for their analysis or for their substantiation of the changes they want to bring to bear on Canada Post services. Canadians don't really care about that. What they care about are the net effects of what's being proposed by Canada Post, and these net effects are very serious, Mr. Speaker. Before I turn to those net effects, I do want to pick up on something the Minister said earlier. This is a common refrain from the Conservatives, and it goes like this. We are not responsible for Canada Post's plan. We are not responsible for Via Rail. We are not responsible for Atomic Energy of Canada. We are not responsible for our port authorities. No, says the Minister of Transport, they're all independent. They're all arm's length and they're all independent. It reminds me of the magnificent moment, Mr. Speaker, years ago in the provincial jurisdiction, the provincial legislature in Ontario, where then Premier Michael Harris came to the floor of the legislature. You'll recall, Mr. Speaker, that at least 6 of the frontline cabinet ministers here under this Conservative government were trained at the heels of Premier Mike Harris. And Mr. Harris came to the floor and he said, you know, we're not the government. We came to fix the government, says the then Premier of a majority government. What it is, Mr. Speaker, is it's a ruse. A ruse. It's an attempt to distance yourself from your responsibility as the 5th minister in 7 years with responsibility for Canada Post by trying to lay blame, to publicly disavow and disown the Crown Corporation. And that is very unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, because it leaves Canadians in the lurch. They don't want to see their government disown their responsibility for this Crown Corporation. Au contraire, Monsieur le Président, les Canadiens et les Canadiennes...
No, Mr. Speaker, Canadians believe that it is the responsibility of the government and of the Transport Minister to ensure that Canada Post's plan is a plan that makes sense for everyday Canadians. And clearly, the plan presented by Canada Post is not a plan that will help everyday Canadians.
We in the Liberal Party have decided to do three things. We have submitted a number of access to information requests to get more information with respect to the government's correspondence, and it's working. It's hand in glove working with the corporation, because it's not Canada Post's plan, Mr. Speaker. It's the Prime Minister's and the Government of Canada's plan. The second thing we're doing is submitting a number of order paper questions so we can find out more information for Canadians as to what's really going on here. What's really going on here? And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, yesterday I had the privilege of meeting with our Parliamentary Budget Officer. And I have asked on behalf of my colleagues in our caucus that the Parliamentary Budget Officer perform a major investigation into the financials, the claims being made by this government that this will amount to savings or better fiscal probity for the corporation. We're going to get to the bottom of these financials by asking an independent body like the PBO, with the backstopping of Library of Parliament research, to find out whether the numbers being used, for example, by the Conference Board of Canada, hold up to scrutiny, to independent scrutiny. I'm not casting aspersions on the Conference Board's good character or good faith, but I think it's incumbent on all parliamentarians to ask that an independent group examine these numbers. Why do I conclude that it's the government's plan, Mr. Speaker? Because when the plan was delivered, you would think that the government with responsibility and the minister with responsibility for the corporation would say, thank you so much for the plan. We'll take it under advisement. We will examine it. We'll come back to you after performing our own analysis, and we'll respond. That's not what happened here, Mr. Speaker. What happened here was, moments after the plan was released, a statement was issued. Pronto presto. The statement was released and it said, we support this plan 100%. I can't imagine for the life of me how a single Conservative MP on that side of the House can say to a constituent in the eyes that this plan can't be improved. That all the creative possibilities at Canada Post were exhausted by 21 senior managers, by Labour representatives, by the entire team at Canada Post. I can't believe that a single MP on the other side in the Conservative caucus isn't hearing from constituents and can say, yes, constituent X or Y, we can assure you without a doubt, every single option was explored. They can't, Mr. Speaker. They can't, because what's really happening here is that the Minister of Finance, through the Minister of Transport, is exerting pressure on the board at Canada Post to say, by 2015, we have this artificial deadline to achieve the elimination of deficit numbers so we can go forward and offer goodies to the Canadian people for an election campaign. Let's be honest. Soyons honnêtes, Monsieur le Président.
Let's be honest, Mr. Speaker. That's what's going on the Conservative side. And that's why the Conservative members have remained silent. That's why they're not asking important questions as to how we can improve Canada Post's plan. No questions have been raised by the Conservatives. They don't have the right to ask questions. But I'm certain that they are hearing from their constituents in their ridings about this issue.
Mr. Speaker, let's start with our seniors. Everybody in this room knows, and every Canadian knows, that we're aging as a population. There are more and more of us becoming older, becoming more senior. So we say to our seniors collectively, and we all believe it's better for our seniors to stay in their residences. We facilitate choices to help seniors stay in their homes for as long as they can, to live with independence, to live with dignity, to live safely. Now we're messaging out to our seniors that, you know, the mail service that you require, that you depend on for your pension checks, for your telephone bills, for your newspaper subscription, we're not going to deliver those anymore to your door. We're expecting you to go to an outside location to pick up your mail. Mr. Speaker, it's minus 27 degrees Celsius today with wind chill in the city of Ottawa, where I'm speaking. It's about minus 25 to minus 30 Celsius across the entire country, except for parts of the West. Do we really expect that seniors are going to get outside? I know that the President and CEO of Canada Post made remarks about fitness, and only tongue-in-cheek would I say that, and did I say to him that this is some sort of postal participation program. But it's not serious. With ice and slush, winter, it's not serious for Canadians who are seniors living in their homes. Let's talk about disabilities and Canadians with disabilities, Mr. Speaker. And we have a growing percentage of Canadians with disabilities because this is also connected to an aging society. En 2012,
In 2012, approximately 3.8 million Canadians, in other words, 14% of the Canadian population, 15 years and older, declared that they had a disability that prevented them from undertaking daily tasks. That's Canadians in 2012.
of Canadians 15 years old and older reported being limited in their daily activities because of a disability. Almost 14% today, and growing. Leaving aside the unfortunate connection between poverty and disability in Canadian society, Mr. Speaker, that's for another issue, another debate. Why are we saying to our disabled Canadians, Canadians with disabilities, that they're not going to get mail delivery? And whatever mail they're now depending on, they're going to have to pay more for in terms of sending and or receiving correspondence. I don't think this is thought through at all in terms of the practical ramifications for Canadians with disabilities, Mr. Speaker. That testimony was elicited from Bob Brown, who came to committee and told us, with the Canadian Council of Canadians with Disabilities, that they had not been consulted at all. And similarly, looking at effects again, Mr. Speaker, let's turn to our small businesses. The Conservatives love to say that small businesses are the engine of the Canadian economy. In fact, we all agree on all sides of the House that that is the case, that 3 out of 4 jobs are created by businesses with 50 employees or less. We know that to be the case. However, when the President of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business came to committee to testify about these changes, the President testified and said they were blindsided. They were never consulted by Canada Post, never consulted by Transport Canada, the largest single trade association representing tens of thousands of small businesses, never asked the question, what would the effects might be here if we raise prices for stamps, if we eliminate postal service door-to-door 5 days a week for your business, etc., etc. Not a single question was raised. No dialogue was ever had with this group. The Conservatives can't deny it. They know it. Very unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, this is going to really wreak havoc on our small businesses. More and more Canadians are doing the right thing. More and more young people today are not asking the question, who's going to hire me? On the contrary, they're asking the question, who am I going to hire? And as a result, particularly women, we're seeing more and more startup businesses, more and more small businesses in people's homes. And as a result, with these changes, the consultants, the IT experts, all those folks who are running small businesses are going to be hit hard. Turning lastly to our municipalities, Mr. Speaker, the costs to municipalities, the maintenance of these community mailboxes, the location of these boxes and the potential expropriation of land. None of this was thought through. Here's a letter from Mike Bradley, Mayor of the City of Sarnia. Quote, there's been no consideration or thought given that this will create a significant tax increase at the local level across this country from coast to coast. And while municipalities may look to other alternatives, There is also legal limitations through legislation. This was not thought through, Mr. Speaker. All of these effects on our seniors, on Canadians with disabilities, on our municipalities, on our small businesses, this is now wreaking havoc. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, Canada Post can do better. This Minister of Transport needs to put labour and management together at one table, use our creative possibilities, use our thinking, come up with a better plan so we're not the only OECD country in the world to eliminate door-to-door services and effectively, under the guise of improvement, move towards the privatization of our postal system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Excellent.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Essex.
Mr. Speaker, I'll take note the member didn't mention that the CFIB did support and its members did support, and they said so at the hearing, the elimination of door-to-door delivery in all of Canada. Now, it's easier, Speaker, far easier to criticize a plan that somebody else has decided on. It's far tougher to wade through the complex issues and make the complex decisions and sometimes tough decisions that result from complex problems. I didn't hear any solution other than let's have a dialogue from the member opposite. But since he mentioned that there's an impact on seniors to this, and he made that a very central point to his intervention, is he therefore advocating an expansion of door-to-door delivery in Canada to the 2/3 of addresses that currently don't have it? Presumably, if seniors living in that part of Canada are adversely affected and cannot cope with it, he must support an expansion of services, first of all. Does he? And secondly, how does he propose that Canada Post would in fact pay for such an expansion of door-to-door delivery to the other 2/3 of Canada?
The honourable member for Ottawa South.
I think what you have, Mr. Speaker, actually is there you have it. What you see from a Conservative parliamentary secretary is that this is a zero-sum game. You see, it's this 5-point plan or nothing. And that's exactly the kind of positional approach that tells Canadians that it's their plan. It's not Canada Post's plan, it's their plan. If I were the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Transport, I would be asking questions like, so you're telling us Canada Post that it's 5 days of elimination of mail delivery, or is it possible that we can get mail delivered every second or third day? So you're telling us Canada Post that you actually haven't got the analysis to talk about the distributive effects on our small and medium-sized companies? Why haven't you? So it's not worth rising to the zero-sum game of the parliamentary secretary. What has to happen here, Mr. Speaker, is we need to go back to the drawing board. I have confidence that the management of Canada Post, that good officials at Transport Canada, that good people in our unions and our labour movement can do better than this, can come forward with more creative possibilities. I often hear the Conservatives, as I heard the Minister moments ago, dismiss outright the idea put forward by Labour about postal banking services. I'm not prepared to dismiss that outright, Mr. Speaker. If someone had told Canadians 15 years ago that a major food retail outlet in this country would be selling mortgages at a store where you could buy your milk, they wouldn't have believed it. There are many options for us going forward here to make sure that we maintain our postal services. But the plan to eliminate door-to-door service, the plan to raise the cost of stamps, in my view, is being done because the corporation has been given 4 corners of parameters to operate within by the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Transport, which in my view is hamstringing their creativity.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaires. L'honorable député.
The honourable member.